Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brenner, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. And thank you as always to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, and following this journey with us. We are on the road to 2K people, so keep helping us get there. But yes, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title, we are going to get back into our Nina Project theory. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into part 2. So if you have not seen part 1, go check that one out. We kind of did a briefing and kind of like I just explained what these parts of the intro to the Nina Project kind of represent. Or more specifically, what I thought they represented, all right? Because as I've been reanalyzing this and analyzing it a lot more thorough, okay, I've started to pick up on things that some unanswered questions in this show are being answered kind of symbolically. And the reason being for that is because as I've started to analyze, say, these first 2 scenes of the Nina Project intro, that's what we're going to analyze here. We're going to analyze that van scene, and then we're going to analyze the military raid scene. But within those 2 scenes, okay, in part 1, I explained that in the second part, okay, the military raid scene, I started getting ideas that maybe we might be getting answers to, say, Hopper's involvement and maybe how he knew 11 was in the woods. Or more specifically, how he's involved with Sam Owens whatsoever, and we really don't understand that still to this day. However, as I have been analyzing this, I started picking up on these hidden connections, okay, and it's very, very symbolic, and the reason being is because we're receiving new storyline. So if they're trying to throw hints at us to past seasons and all of that, they're basically throwing this at us while we are receiving new storyline, which makes this very hard to analyze. But how we're going to do this, okay, is the main questions that we are going to try and figure out here, and what I've picked up on is how did Hopper know 11 was possibly in the woods until Levi goes at the end of season 1, which is still a big unanswered question still to this day. But I want you to keep in mind, at this point in the show, we do not know Brenner is alive right in this moment, right? However, by the time this Nina Project intro ends, okay, we end up getting our reveal that Papa is still alive, okay? And I want you to keep in mind that at the very end of season 1, we don't necessarily know what happens to him. So that has also been a very big unanswered question as to what happened to him exactly. We just believe him to be dead, correct? We just automatically think that he died in that moment. However, in season 2, we kind of get a hint of that Brenner could still be alive, being Papa. Mainly because when 11 and Kali, okay, in season 2, chapter 7, the Lost Sister, okay, they go to that guy's house that used to work at Hawkins' lab, that Ray dude, and basically when they're messing with him and they're beating him up and all that shit, basically he tells them straight up that Papa is still alive, that Dr. Brenner is still alive, and 11 does not believe him. But this guy is very confident, and that kind of put it in our heads all the way back in season 2 that there's a possibility that Papa is still alive. So with all that being said, as I started analyzing that, those questions started coming up in my mind and coming up in my analysis as I analyzed these things very deeply. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and get some answers involving all of that, but the main thing is in this Nina Project is we have to use our girl 11 as a reference. More specifically as our main connection to trying to remember back. So things that are involved with 11 or people that are involved with 11 or situations, okay, that's how we have to analyze this. So as we jump into this, okay, we're going to jump into this first little section of the Nina Project intro scene, okay, which is the van scene that I'm calling it. The reason being is because that van is a major symbol at what we need to look back on. And I'm going to say this right away, is that we know the vans are a big thing in season 1 used with Hawkins' lab and how they go undercover, correct? They basically use the power company vans, okay? So just think about that. That's a major vehicle used involving the secrets of Hawkins' lab and how they stay undercover within this city. So that's very interesting. However, how I mentioned that scene with Kali and that Ray guy in 11, okay? That also connects to 11 directly, but the thing you got to keep in mind is that season 2 also begins with the scene with a van also involving Kali. And more specifically, how they get around, okay, that's kind of their getaway vehicle or their undercover vehicle in a sense. So it's very interesting that van, just this van, is a major symbol on what to look back to. So as the scene goes on, we see this calm before the storm moment, and then all of a sudden this van comes racing down the road and it pulls our attention inside. And basically what we see is Argyle, and he's looking back, okay? So what I want you to keep in mind is that Argyle's kind of representing us in this sense. He's like our guy, Argyle, all right? So just think about that. That's kind of a stupid little comparison, but think about that like for real. Because Argyle is kind of a symbol that what he's doing is he's the one driving this van, okay? And he's driving forward, correct? So if we think about this like timeline-wise, basically Argyle represents that we are still moving forward in this story, receiving new storyline and all this shit, but as he looks back, he is looking back at what we already know in this show, okay? So that's a representation that we're moving forward, but we should be looking back as well. Because what I want you to keep in mind, that first little bit, okay, that we just talked about just up until Argyle and that he's looking back at some chaos happening involved with the van. Basically, the first thing I thought of, I'm like, oh, Argyle's kind of flipping out. And then I'm like, oh shit, that connects right away because what do we have in season 1, chapter 7, people? The bathtub specifically. Basically, in the beginning of that chapter episode, what do we get? We get a huge scene involving the van where our group is racing away from a problem, and then all of a sudden a problem comes in front of them being a van. And then what do we end up seeing happen, people? We end up seeing 11 end up showing us her true potential and her true powers right in that moment. And she actually showed us some right before that when she saves Mike's life in the previous chapter. But what I want you to keep in mind is that we see her flip this van, okay? So like I said, Argyle's kind of flipping out within this van. And I know it's very, very hidden and symbolic, but no doubt in my mind that led me on this journey. But the next thing we see, alright, we see our group freaking out. They're trying to stop this bleeding, okay, on this secret hero agent man or unknown hero agent man that Argyle ends up calling him later. But what they keep saying, they're like, oh, the bleeding won't stop. It won't slow down. So if you think that we're comparing those scenes from that van scene and that van flip scene, that's basically what our group is freaking out about in that moment, is that the vans are not slowing down behind them. And also the new problem that is now faced in front of them. So if you think about this, there's a lot of very hidden symbolism here, and it's wild. Because these next lines, all right, kind of cut off from that van scene and they start talking about other stuff, all right? That's how quick this is. Because basically Jonathan looks up at Argyle, okay? He's looking forward now and he says, you got to get us to St. Mary's. And Argyle looks backwards and he goes, I don't think praying's going to help that dude, man. So like I said, how Argyle kind of represents us in this moment, all right? He just looked back and he said that, all right? So if we think about that we're going to be looking back at something, all right? Specifically at a person that we believe that is gonna be a goner or that is going to die, correct? Because literally what he just said is he goes, I don't think praying's gonna help that guy. So Argyle basically is assuming that this guy is going to die. So if we think about that, very symbolic, Dr. Brenner is one of those people that we know, or at this point in time, we just believe to be dead, but we have that secret shit going on with Collie and 11 where they find out that he could be alive. Because now, this is where it gets very interesting, because how Jonathan basically says, he goes, no, you idiot, St. Mary's Hospital. This is a tell that we got to pay attention to something involving Jonathan. Because basically he's like, no, you idiot, the hospital, all right? So if we think about that, if we look back to when we remember the hospital specifically, Jonathan is involved with that, a main person involved with what happens at Hawkins Memorial Hospital. More specifically in season 3, okay, when him and Nancy go there to try and investigate what's going on with Doris and the Flayed, correct? Basically, what we end up seeing in that scene is kind of something that somewhat resembles what we see at the end of season 1 involving what happens in the school. Basically, they go there to try and get answers and trying to figure out what's going on and how to stop this problem. And then this problem comes in and it basically attacks them. So what you got to keep in mind is that if we're connecting this, all right, 11 is there in this moment, all right? But if we're connecting Jonathan first, this is where it gets very interesting. Because basically when Jonathan and Nancy are downstairs or wherever they're at in that hospital and they're trying to get away from Tom and that other guy, that guy Bruce, I believe. Basically after they kind of beat them, right? And they think that they have everything under control in that moment, all right? What we see is they just turn into this goop or this Flayed or whatever. And those two specifically join together and they create that monster that they end up having to run away from, correct? So what we see in that scene is that Jonathan ends up trying to find Nancy, and Nancy's hiding in that room, okay? And that thing comes under the door and it basically starts to attack her. However, when we see that she is about to be a goner, okay, or we think that she might be a goner and about to die in that moment, 11 is the one that comes in and pulls that monster off of her, correct? So, like I said, how we're trying to connect this Brenner stuff and how he possibly survived, and we don't really understand what happened. What we see is that Brenner basically gets jumped on top of, correct? So what we see here is that we're getting this comparison to look back at this scene, and that's basically what happens with Nancy, is that thing comes on top of her, and then basically 11 bursts in that door and she ends up saving her, okay? So is that something that we're trying to pick up on, that something happened like that with Brenner, that someone came in and ended up saving Brenner from that Demogorgon somehow? As we see in season 1, we know it would not be 11, so it's very interesting to this, and we don't understand that, but that kind of gives it its own storyline as you're picking up on it. I hope you're picking up on it at least. Because what happens here, it kind of continues, but it kind of switches up again, because this secret hero agent man, that's what I'm going to call him, but they call him unknown hero agent man. This is our first unknown hero agent man. But basically, he starts speaking up. He finally starts talking. He gets enough strength to start talking, and he goes, no hospital. I need you to warn Owens. The girl is in danger. And basically, Jonathan looks at him and he goes, okay, how do we find Owens, all right? And this is another clue in a way. Basically, this is hinting at, if we're looking for answers and looking back, is like, there's another big question in this show is, how did Owens come into play? As we know, season 1 ends where we think Brenner died, all right? And obviously, we know that he has not. But that also raises the question as to how did Sam Owens become the director of Hawkins Lab and the new one in charge after season 1 when he's not involved at all? So that raises the question is that, was he involved? We just don't see that. And are we going to see stuff like that in season 5 for some more specific reason? But if we think about that as kind of a clue or a hint on what to pay attention to, as well as to how did Owens come into the story, we can kind of pay attention to a few things. One of those things being 11, but another thing being Hopper. Because at this point in time, we know that Owens is involved with Hawkins Lab, but we don't know that he's involved necessarily directly with Dr. Brenner. We don't really know that too much. However, we do know that there's this secret involvement with Jim Hopper in season 1, and he says something to Dr. Brenner, correct? But then we don't know what happens to Brenner, and then it jumps to season 2 where Hopper is also involved with Dr. Owens. So that raises the question as to how did Dr. Owens come into play, correct? It's very interesting to all of this. Because this next part right here is where the symbolism comes in really, really crazy, all right? Because what this unknown hero agent man, the secret hero agent man, whatever you want to call him, basically what he starts saying, okay, he speaks up and he goes, Nina, all right? And what I want you to keep in mind is there's a lot of meanings for the name Nina or the word Nina. But the meaning that we're going to use here, all right, is the meaning of little girl, okay? So if you think about this right now, that he just said Nina twice, all right? So that kind of hints at he said little girl, little girl. Now, if we're trying to connect what we just kind of got a hint of, that we're trying to figure out how Owens came into play, that would be involved with season 2, all right? But if we think about this line as well, basically this secret hero agent man just said, okay, pay attention to little girl, all right? And in season 2, we get the idea that there is another number involved being Kali, and we see her at the very start of season 2. That's who kicks off season 2, mind you. But when we see that 11 needs to go and find Kali, or that she thinks she needs to go and find Kali, basically Mama shows her Kali as a little girl, and she shows her with Jane, 2 little girls, correct? Because what Mike says real quickly, basically he goes, Nina, who's Nina? And that's where we get another hint, as we don't know if our group knows anything about Kali. What we can look back on is something involving season 3 when Mike is talking to 11 when she's about to go and try and find Billy. Basically, 11 remembers that her mom showed her a flashback, basically a memory, okay, a past memory. So 11 uses that knowledge and she basically understands that she could do the same thing with Billy. And when Mike's kind of talking to her, he's like, you know you don't need to do this. But what he mentions is he mentions something about her mom. So obviously 11 said something to at least Mike about her mom, but we do not hear anything involving her sister, okay, being Kali. So that's very interesting to that line, how Mike is the one who goes, oh, Nina, who's Nina? Because if we refresh our memories like we're doing here, okay, Mike is the one who brings up that he knows a little bit about something involving season 2 and what 11 was doing, but he does not mention Kali. And then this is the part where we talked about in part 1 how the timestamps kind of match up and give us something, a way to maybe analyze this compared to other scenes, all right? However, the timestamp at this moment when this guy hands them the pen and says, here's the number, basically that timestamp is at timestamp 56 seconds, okay? So we have talked about all of this comparison within 56 seconds, people. That's my point here, is how much hidden connection is here. But at timestamp 56 seconds, and if you add those together, that equals 11, and that also is the timestamp where he says, here is this number, okay? This secret number we know nothing about involved with a pen. So what I want you to keep in mind is we can kind of make the joke that, oh, the pen can resemble like a pen pal, all right? This guy is trying to be a friend and give them the truth and give them an answer, correct? Or we could just connect the fact that this is a secret number involved with 11 as well because of the timestamp, all right? So just think about that secret number involved with 11 at this point in time before all of this basically would be number 8, our girl Kali. So just think about that. If you think about all of this as hidden connections, it all plays out. Because what I'm going to try and do right now, I'm going to try and brain blast all of you with this last little connection here that until it cuts off to another connection. Basically what Jonathan says, he goes, we can call this Nina, all right? And this is a big thing that has a lot of connections and it connects everything we just said. Basically, if we think about the fact and we try and connect anything to do with 11 with this and the fact that she knows about Kali, this second little girl, the Nina, right? But when she's about to run away, and basically when she runs away from answers, are our answers that we get involving her mother, okay? That's the last time we ever see her mama, all right? Terry Ives. Basically, that scene, all right, symbolizes a scene where 11 is running away from answers that we could have received, correct? Well, what happens right after Jonathan says this, okay, is when this guy basically dies. So, if you think about this, okay, our answers to this right now kind of are coming to a close with this secret hero agent man. That's what I'm going to call him. He's our secret. Because, like I said, what Jonathan says right before, he says, we can call this Nina, all right? And if we think back to how we just connected Kali and 11 and to Mom and all that, when 11 leaves, all right, basically Aunt Becky is on the phone, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use Becky as our connection to Brenner because she connects to Mama, to Q11, and also to Hawkins' lab being Brenner. So now you might be confused because I've been mentioning Hopper here, all right? But basically what Aunt Becky does in that scene is she is on the phone with Flo, okay? She's on the phone with Flo from the police station who is involved with Hopper, correct? And even on that call, she mentions that Hopper came there, okay, with Joyce the year before trying to look for a little girl. So basically, if we do that connection, okay, Aunt Becky who connects to Brenner symbolically through other people, and then she's calling Flo who connects to Hopper, and now they are trying to find a way to help the little girl being 11. So we have a direct connection that we're trying to look for answers involving Brenner, Hopper, and 11. Is that not interesting or fucking what, people? Because what we know happens, people, is that when 11 does run away, okay, this also has some symbolism to what happens when 11 does run away, right? Involving that Ray guy. Basically, in that moment is when we figure out that Brenner could still be alive, correct? So, as we are receiving this answer, and 11 is not believing this, Kali is the one that's sitting there, alright? Basically telling her to kill him, just kill him, he's hurt your mother, all of this shit. But as 11 is questioning this, okay, she's kind of questioning the fact that Brenner could still be alive because this guy seems very confident. So basically, while this is happening, alright, there's something else that connects also to what we just talked about with the two little girls, correct? Basically, while 11 and Kali are questioning and basically beating this guy's ass, we see Axel and Dottie, okay, two of Kali's gang members. They basically go into the bedroom, and what do they come across, people? Basically, they come across two little girls on the phone, okay? So think about that, people. There's a direct connection to everything we just talked about. Can we call this Nina? The two Nina little girls. So, no doubt in my mind, I'm on to fucking something, and I hope you all agree, and I hope you're liking this so far. But my point is that what that guy does in our scene, this van scene, is he dies with no answers, correct? But what happens, alright, after we get the reveal that there's two little girls on the phone and they come out to warn 11 and Kali, basically 11's questioning what she's gonna do, and Kali kind of steps in the way and she's about to kill him. And more specifically, kill him before we get answers, correct? So all of this connects, alright? And Kali would have been the cause to that, except 11 shows this man mercy. So that's the big thing I'm questioning here is about what happened to possibly Brenner is that did that Demogorgon show him mercy for any fucking reason whatsoever and we do not know why? Or did someone come in and save him? Like we got a comparison to that as well, which is very interesting to this. Because as we have all these comparisons, okay, this van scene comes to a close with our group basically going silent. This guy dies and Argyle's basically freaking out and he's looking back and he's like, talk to me, give me answers, right? But Jonathan's the one that realizes someone is behind him and that they're being chased, and then Will realizes it too, and they both tell Argyle to get off the road, and he's kind of not listening, and that's when he's like, talk to me, what, is this guy dead? But this symbolizes is that we still need to be, even after this moment, that we still need to be looking back at past problems and connect what we just connected here, because basically they just tell Argyle to get off this road, okay, so we're gonna get off this road as well. And basically Argyle listens after he finally calms down for a second and they all scream at him, and then basically he just rides off of this road and we get let off of this road in this part of the connection. Now what we need to do is we need to connect the second little part of this. See how we're kind of connecting part 1 and part 2 of this. Basically what we're trying to do here is get our unanswered questions about how part 1 and part 2 connected, and that all makes sense to this. Because as we jump into this military raid scene, all right, I want you to keep in mind that we've seen a couple things like this before where a house is being raided. So more specifically involving that Collie and 11 scene, all right, when they go to Ray's house, basically that's what they do is they kind of just knock on the door and then they raid his motherfucking house, people. But also in season 2, okay, when everything's going on with Will and he has that seizure, okay, by the tunnels and they have to bring him to the hospital, basically Hawkins Lab and those people, they come in and they basically raid the Byers house, and that's what's happening in this scene is that the Byers house is being raided. But more specifically in that scene, that's when they come in to get all the pictures of Will's maps, all right? So that's very interesting is that in this, we're trying to kind of map out all of these connections and how things connect. But there's a bigger scene that connects a lot more to this, all right? Involving our man, Dr. Brenner, okay? And the reason being is in season 1, all right, when we see Brenner after Will vanishes, okay, basically Hawkins Lab, they go there and they basically raid the Byers house again. More specifically, the Byers property, and they go into the shed and Brenner sees something in there, okay? So just keep that in mind. That's a very, very hidden connection here. And not just the fact that what he saw, we don't really see too much. All we see is that little bit of goo that he sees and then he's like fascinated by it. But in that scene, what we see is basically the man in charge, okay, comes across something and kind of makes this weird face and then he's kind of fascinated and interesting about it, correct? So as we see in this scene, okay, basically we see the soldiers coming in and they're raiding the Byers house, they're breaking all their shit, and then there's this one scene where this soldier comes into, I believe, Will's bedroom and he opens up this top drawer. So I'm going to try and brain blast you again for the reason being that this also shows some deep hidden connections unless you remember how this show has gone in the past. Because if we jump a little bit, all right, what is a huge reference associated with the Nina Project, people? We end up finding out that when they find out this secret number, they end up calling it and it makes all these computer noises, correct? Well, they kind of listen to it and they kind of realize that it sounds like something, and they reference the movie War Games. So what I want you to keep in mind, all right, that this is not a stretch, that this is a direct connection here, all right? Because what we see is a soldier, and then he opens this drawer and we see this little puzzle game, correct? So basically we have a soldier in a game, okay? If we put those together, we kind of got some war games, all right? Or a war game going on. But what I want you to keep in mind is that that puzzle, all right? That puzzle is called a peg game or peg solitaire. It's also called high IQ. So if we want to receive some high IQ points here, we're going to connect even something else. We're going to figure out what this game is, all right? The point of this game, which I've played this game before, I actually have one at home, but the point of this game is where you take the pegs and then you basically hop over other pegs to remove pieces of the puzzle, correct? So you're hopping over them to remove pieces. So, you think I'm crazy? All right, well, in season 2, all right, when we see Jonathan come into Will Byers' room and he's going to have that whole conversation that we've talked about all in the when Will was the spy theory. But basically, Jonathan comes into his bedroom, all right, and he gives him an option of 3 movies. And Will's like, just pick whatever you want because he's annoyed in that moment. But what Jonathan does is, all right, he puts those movies on top of a dresser, correct? Like we see this soldier opening a dresser. Well, I don't know know if I could get a clear shot. I had one in the past, all right, where I was able to see the actual name of the movie. It's gotten hard, and if I could put it in here, I will. But one of those movies that Jonathan brought in was the movie War Games. So, how this man just opened this dresser, okay, well, Jonathan, if we're connecting all of this hidden symbolism, okay, that War Games movie was on top of this dresser, people. So, it's just a theory, Jonathan's, let's keep going. Because as we see the scene continue, we see our main guy in charge, that Sullivan guy who's the soldier, and he basically comes into Jonathan's room, and he looks in the closet, but then what does he do, people? He notices something, and he makes a weird face, and he's very interested in it, correct? So, like I just said, how we're comparing that Brenner scene more than anything, when he comes into the buyer's shed and he kind of looks at something, he seems very interested in it, correct? Basically, both those men are the men in charge, involved with all these people, helping them raid the buyer's house. But what I want you to keep in mind here is that we see something interesting, is that this man gets this note, and then he walks over to our second unknown hero agent man, or our second secret hero agent man. And basically, he shows him this note, and what we called this in part 1 is that this is a note from L, but what we're calling this is that this is a sign from L, and it says it right on that note that it's from L. So, as we know, the soldiers are in the buyer's house, raiding this buyer's house to try and figure out where 11 is at, and that's what this man says to him. He says straight up, he goes, "You're gonna tell us where to find the girl," or something close to that. But that's my point, is that this is why they are there. They're trying to find 11, correct? So now, if we think back to that scene, how Brenner looked in that shed and saw a sign of something, we don't really know what that's a sign of or exactly what the fuck he's looking at. But you gotta keep in mind that could that have been a sign from L, and that's why he was so fascinated by that in that moment. However, what I want you to keep in mind is this connects to something a little bit more, and it also connects to our boy Hopper, because as we talked about in part 1 of this theory, is that our boy Hopper is the soldier we know in the show. More specifically, the soldier that is involved with our main group. Okay, he's the soldier of our group, all right? So we represent this soldier as Hopper in a way, and if you think about this, we've kind of seen a scene similar to this involving Hopper and our boy Owens. More specifically, how this soldier just walked down a little step, all right? So he walked down a little tiny staircase, just one single step, but what we see when Hopper comes across Owens in Hawkins' lab, and also involving 11, basically he comes across Owens in that stairwell, and he sees that he's bleeding a lot, kind of like this man, and he basically is going to try and save his life. However, who's behind him, people? 11 is behind him, and this is when we are revealed that Owens did not know that Hopper was hiding 11. Basically, Hopper tells Owens straight up, and he introduces the two of them, except Owens gives 11 this weird look, and 11 does the same thing. So the biggest question here is, people, and I think that we might get answers to in this next part of this theory, but the big question we're going to try and find answers to in that next part is, do 11 and Owens know each other before this moment? And we just do not know that. Because there's some big questions here, people, as to how Owens and Hopper know each other, and the fact that Owens did not know 11 was with Hopper, that could mean that Hopper basically got this info from somebody and basically used it to his advantage to keep 11 secret and safe on his own accord and keep her away from this lab. That kind of gives it its own storyline, if you ask me, and it makes a lot of fucking sense that Hopper would just lie to these guys. As we know, friends don't lie in this show, and we know from season 1 and season 2 that the Hawkins lab does not come off really as friends. So, no doubt in my mind, Hopper, our boy, would do anything to try and keep this girl safe if he knew that she just was capable in season 1 of basically allowing them to go and find Will and keep them safe and keep him survived. So you might be still a little bit confused why I keep just throwing Hopper in there, but if you have not noticed, okay, there's a direct connection to what we just talked about, say involving Brenner with this scenario and also involving Hopper. Basically what we see in season 1, okay, is we see Hopper do that same exact thing that Brenner did, okay, except we get a little bit more of what we're supposed to be seeing involving Brenner. Basically, those two are the only people in this show that we know have seen something in that shed other than anybody else who would have been involved. In season 1, we see Joyce go in there to grab the axe. She sees nothing. She says nothing, okay? In season 2, they use this shed, okay, to basically do that experiment with Will when he's infiltrated by the Mind Flayer. So what you got to keep in mind is there's some weird shit also still involved with this shed, okay? And as you know in part 1 of this theory, okay, that what happens after 11 enters that Nina Project door is symbolic to our answers about that. So within this Nina Project intro so far, we have not gotten to that, but that's what's interesting is that also hints that we're needing to look back at that part, because basically if you think about that, that's the only thing that has this slight hidden connection between Hopper and Brenner, more specifically than anything. They were the only two that went into that shed and saw something after Will Byers has vanished. So what this soldier says to this guy, all right, is very interesting. Like I said it already, is that basically he says to him, he says, if you want to survive, you're going to tell us where to find the girl or something like that. But what you got to keep in mind is that it's very symbolic to how something could have occurred, saying with Brenner and maybe our boy Hopper. Because the reason being is what we see with this unknown hero agent man, the secret hero agent man, whatever you want to call him, all right? Basically, this guy stays silent, and we know in this show that this guy ends up getting tortured to basically reveal these answers. So if we think back to these episodes that we are really comparing, okay, from say chapter 7 of season 1 upward to chapter 7 of season 2, both 7s. But what's very interesting, okay, if you really want to keep pushing in the timestamps, I know people are interested and I could do more about the timestamps in other parts. But if you really want to throw in a timestamp thing, the whole episode of the Nina Project, at least from what I can see on Netflix, is 77 minutes. And we're comparing chapter 7 to 7. So that's very interesting here. But what happens in that chapter 8, our final episode of season 1 that leads into season 2 directly, basically how that starts off, and in that intro, okay, how we're comparing intros in a sense, all right, Hopper basically ends up getting tortured by those men trying to get answers from him, correct? But in that scene, Hopper miraculously says something that allows him to get out of that room, okay, and into a room with Dr. Brenner, where this man is handing him a cigarette. But what does Brenner ask him, people? And it connects directly to all of these connections here. Is basically Brenner just asks him straight up. He goes, tell us where the girl is. Or something like that. But the point is in both of these scenes, that's what they are looking for. And how we found that connection through all of these hidden connections, it connects back directly. Both of these men in charge in this scenario are looking for the girl. But if Hopper, okay, is that one secret hidden connection here to our answer we're trying to solve, that raises the question as to what happened to Brenner at the end of season 1, okay, after that scenario. Because now that we have gotten all of these connections, okay, from the chapter 7 with the Van Flip to connections with Kali and what we see involving Ray, which is an example, people, okay? Kali is not the main symbol of this. However, those Nina connections that led us to that led us to that exact scene about how Brenner is possibly alive. That's why that scene connects directly. So what you got to keep in mind is that since we're connecting both these scenes, all right, we get this kind of storyline here now. Basically, we find out in season 2, okay, that Brenner is still alive, but if we think back to what we saw with Brenner, we don't know how that's possible, okay? But then at the end of season 1, we also see that Jim Hopper, for some reason, knows that 11 is going to possibly be out in the woods. And knows enough that she also eats Eggos, which is very interesting. I don't know if they ever talk about that beforehand, so I've always wondered, how does he know about the Eggo thing as well? However, if you keep that in mind that Sam Owens does not know that Jim Hopper is hiding 11, does that raise the question that he found this info out from somebody else? Because now that we are to this scene, all right, I'm going to give you somewhat of my prediction here, okay? I'm going to kind of try and pin piece like a storyline here of what they could use in this show to think back like this. Basically, if we were in season 5 and they're going to show us a scenario of how Brenner survived, which no doubt in my mind they need to, we still have no answers to that of exactly what happened to him. No doubt in my mind, there are probably very, very hidden connections throughout this Nina project that give us kind of a storyline. And if you think about all of these hidden connections and you kind of can piece this together, basically in season 5, if we see exactly like somewhat close to what we're thinking here, all right, it's gonna kind of feel in a way that we've seen something like this before, correct? How I'm connecting all of this is I'm basing it off of stuff that it resembles of what we've seen before, okay? So if that they use this to their advantage about that and basically now show us in season 5, that's super crazy. That, in my opinion, would be some of the most impressive writing skills and analyzing I have ever done on this show whatsoever. And this Nina project has blown my mind so far. You have to realize that all of this connection is less than probably 2 or 3 minutes of worth of screen time. That's how fast and how much connections they have thrown in here. So basically what I'm thinking, okay, I keep thinking about the fact that how did Jim Hopper know she was out there, okay? And if we're thinking about the fact that, okay, we don't know necessarily the time frame of when Hopper saved Joyce, or saved Will and Joyce and got them out of the Upside Down. I should be saying all 3 of them. I don't know why I said it like that, but you guys know what I mean, basically, okay? But we don't know the time frame of when that happened and when they came out to the time frame of when 11 vanished herself, right? The way we see it is that 11 vanished herself and that Hopper and Joyce are still in the Upside Down and then they find Will and that happens all after. But we do not know time frames here. That's the thing that is left out about all of this. So if we're thinking that that happened before 11 vanished, say where the Hopper, Joyce, and Will, they save Will and they come out of the Upside Down, all right? And that's before 11 vanished. What we end up finding out within that scene, how Brenner ends up allowing Hopper and Joyce to go into the Upside Down, whatever he told them, okay, obviously he gave up 11 in that moment. And no, I'm not trying to make him look like a bad guy, but in my opinion, I think he did that because he thought if he could get to Will fast enough and save him, that he could also get back to that school and probably save 11 as well. So what I'm thinking here after this analysis is that basically what we see with Hopper, Joyce, and Will basically coming out of the Upside Down, which we don't ever see anything like that, which is very interesting to this. But I'm thinking that happened before 11 vanished. So if that's the case, that would kind of give Hopper enough time maybe to try and race back to the school while Joyce and Will end up going to the hospital, okay, where we later see them. But there's one line that could connect to this and it happens later in this show, so this is a little bit of cheating, all right? But do not do this if you're analyzing this. But what I want you to keep in mind is something we know in the show that's very odd to me, and it has always been odd to me, is that Hopper tells those Russian guys when they're at their last meal, basically when he's describing that monster, the Demogorgon, okay, he basically tells them that he's seen one once and that he's fought one once. And in this show, we have never seen Hopper fight a Demogorgon, other than what we see at the end of this season, okay? A Demogorgon like that, Hopper has never fought, or at least we've never seen him see one or fight one like that. All we've seen Hopper fight is demo dogs, which is not what he fights in Russia. So that's very, very interesting, and that's always raised this question. However, now that we're trying to connect this, okay, this is what gets very, very interesting to all of this, is that if Hopper, for some reason, did see a Demogorgon and fought one once, could this be the scenario where that happened, where he came back to the school, okay, and he sees that that Demogorgon had jumped up on top of Brenner, all right? Basically, maybe he is attacking Brenner, and basically he might have scratched his face like we see he has that scar in his face, correct? We don't know. But we get that evidence that he has this scar, so something happened involving his face, all right? However, what you got to keep in mind is that if, say for any reason, Jim Hopper comes up in there trying to save 11 and come back and get 11 and those boys before everything goes fucking haywire, but say he sees that shit and he's able to get that Demogorgon off of him by shooting his ass or something. I mean, I'm just thinking hypothetical here. No doubt in my mind, he could have scared that thing off and that thing could have tried to go and find 11 like it was initially trying to do. And what I want you to keep in mind is that if that is the case and he for some reason was able to come in here and he comes across Brenner, and say that scenario didn't even happen, he just comes in here and comes across Brenner who's dying. Basically, the only proof that I have right here is that what we see after 11 in season 2 comes back out of the Upside Down, we see her come back out the same area where Brenner got attacked. And what we see here is that she walks out, and we don't really pay attention to this at all, but there are bloodlines, okay? Like someone was dragged, correct? So, is that a possibility of what maybe Hopper could have done to Dr. Brenner in order for him to get his answers, like we see with these secret hero agent men in all of these scenes? Basically, did Hopper come up and he dragged him to safety, and then for some reason 11 vanishes it, and he goes and sees that gate that was created? It's something that he might have seen all the way back in the first episode in the buyer's shed. And that would also be the comparison to what both Hopper and Brenner both saw. So that would be a direct link of what he could bring up. But how we compare all of these scenes we just talked about, if we kind of go in a reverse manner, we might get a storyline that if Brenner was there and Hopper kind of saved him and dragged him, and he's questioning him, say, up against a wall like we see. Basically, he could have saw that gate, and he knows that something involved with that, and that will survive, so that 11 now could still be alive. Basically, all he's got to do is he's got to have Brenner held up against that wall, and he's got to question him, and he's got to say these same lines we just said, is if you want to survive, you're going to tell me where to find the girl. That gives explanation to how he possibly could have known that 11 was still alive and that she's going to be out in the forest. But what's interesting is we have another gate out in that forest that has unanswered questions, all right? And all we know it as is that it's a Demogorgon gate and all that shit, and that gate being in the tree. So, for any reason, if Brenner knows about that gate, all right, he could tell him that maybe she can come out of there, or that she might end up in the forest. But how that secret hero agent man kind of stays silent, all right? We got to compare to what we see in the beginning, all right? Of how that guy kind of gives us some answers. Basically, this guy gives them a pen with this number involved with what, people? On how to contact and find Nina and how to warn Owens. So, if we compare that say Brenner, for any reason, he's extremely injured, all right? And he tells Hopper where to find him, and Hopper's like, oh, I'm going to get you to a hospital. Basically, no doubt in my mind, Brenner is going to say the same thing that this man said, saying, no hospital. You need to warn Owens. The girl is in danger, people. And then as we know, these secret numbers and these pens are involved with this shit. And so all logically Brenner has to tell Hopper is, here's the secret number and here's the pen to get in contact with Owens. But as we see our group, they don't understand what this means and they're freaking out and they get no answers. So could that have been the same thing involving Hopper, is that he got this pen and he had to figure this shit out on his own? And basically we don't see how they get involved. That whole piece of the puzzle is hopped over and skipped. Basically, all these little pieces are removed, kind of like that little puzzle we see involving Hopper and all that shit. Just keep that all in mind. So, with all that being said, I know this is a crazy scenario, but the connections are there. It's just a matter of figuring out how they could use this as a storyline. But if you ask me, the connections are directly there. That Hopper and Brenner basically both are the ones that saw something involving a possible gate. At the end of season 1, we know 11 vanishes into that gate, and if Hopper came back there to try and help them and get the boys and get 11, and they see these boys that, 11 vanished, we don't know where she went. Basically, all he has to do is he has to see that gate right on that classroom wall, and if it's something that he saw in Will Byers' shed, he would know right away that 11 could be alive. The main reason being is because he just went into the Upside Down. The same thing happened to Will, and Will obviously was alive, so Hopper would have this knowledge, correct? But we don't see Hopper get a secret number, or we don't see how he got in contact with Owens. And this gives that an explanation too, correct? Because as this Nina project continues, this intro continues, what we see is that we see 11 is involved with Owens, okay? And he's leading her to this experiment being the Nina project, where we get the reveal of Brenner. Well, what that basically shows us for the first time is that Brenner and Owens are directly connected within Hawkins' lab, and that they know each other and that they're working together for some specific reason. So that's another unanswered question as to what we need to solve, all right? That obviously Owens knows stuff about season 1 and has involvement. We just don't see that character in that story. So, with all that being said, I know this is a lot to take in, but just let me know your thoughts, all right? It's basically creating a storyline through hidden symbolism, which is just fascinating to me. But I hope you guys liked this one. This was part 2 of the Nina Project Theory, and part 3 we are going to be getting into directly right away. So, much love to all of you. With all that being said, keep subscribing, liking, following that journey, and you guys already know we out.